Alright, what's up Facebook? It's Tommy again with Devastation Knife Works. I'm going to be going through my method of how I make micarta. I've got this I got to make for a Tonto blade that I'm working on. So on this one we're just going simple. By the way, that's the little Tonto that I'm working on. So they want just red and black micarta scales. And there's a few different ways that I could do this, but today I'm just using just regular old construction paper. And then I've got Bondo brand fiberglass resin. There's lots of other resins that you can use. West Systems has some resins that are great for this. Bondo is not the greatest, mainly especially if you're trying to do whiter or bright color, because the amberish color of the resin doesn't really lend itself well to brighter white colors. But for anything other than that, it seems to work fine. I've used I forget what it was now. Cast Craft, Easy Cast. I've used this stuff before. It takes a really long time for it to cure normally, but this stuff is completely clear. So if you need to do a bright color, this will work a lot better. So the way that I usually do it is I'll take my construction paper and I'll cut it down to whatever size that I'm going to make the block out of. And then I've just got some simple pieces of plywood that I've cut out that's got wax paper on it. It seems to release really well after it's cured up. So I just layer them up, layer the fiberglass resin on top of it, and clamp it together and squish it in so the resin gets everywhere. So I'm going to go ahead and turn the camera off. I'm not going to bore you with me cutting this down to size. So I'll come back after I've gotten all this cut up. I've got the red over here. So once I get them all cut together to the size I need, I'll come back and we'll go from there. Alright. Alright guys, so we're back. So I've got the colors cut up. I got 3 cups. I just use these little paper cups from the dollar store. They're 3 ounce, if I remember correctly. I fill them to a little over 2/3 of the way, so it should be about 2 ounces. I usually mix my resin a little light, the hardener. Gives me a little more working time with it. I just refreshed myself to make sure I remembered it correctly. But the Bondo fiberglass resin, it's 1 ounce of resin to 10 drops of hardener, or 6 teaspoons or tablespoons. 6 tablespoons of resin to 1/4 teaspoon of hardener. I just go with drops. But I usually try to go a little over 2 ounces and do 20 drops per cup. I only do 1 cup at a time. I just go ahead and pour these out to get them ready. I'm going to set these out the way. That way all I got to do is drop my hardener in them, mix it up, and go. Because I know I'll go through it. If you mix it the 1 ounce to 10 drops of hardener, you've got about 7 to 12 minutes or so, is what it says, of working time before it starts to heat up and set up. That's why I go a little lighter on the hardener. It gives me a couple extra minutes to work with it, but I have had some of these bigger billets, I guess, of micarta where even then it's starting to fire off before I'm done. You'll kind of notice because it'll heat up a little bit. The cup or the material, if you're touching it, it'll heat up a little bit. But yeah, it's pretty self-explanatory as long as you read the instructions on the resin. The same with like the Cast and Craft. It's a 1-to-1 ratio, just like epoxy. So you just mix half and half of each one. So, but basically all I'm going to do is once I mix this up, I'll go ahead and put a thin layer of it down on this, and it makes it sticky, so the paper wants to stick to the resin. And then I usually do about 2 layers of paper, either 2 to 4 layers of paper, depending on how thick the layers I want. I've done some up to 6, but I'll do a layer, coat it with resin, do another layer, coat it with resin. I guess we'll go ahead and get this mixed up. I usually use a small paintbrush to flow the resin, if you will. It works really good. I've used my hands even, if I needed to, but paintbrushes usually work pretty well. Dollar Tree, your best friend for usable supplies like this. So I'm going to go do 20 drops in this one. Like I said, I'm not going to mix the other two until I get to them. If I don't use the third one, I usually just put it back in the can. So that's why one reason why I wait to mix them. So okay. Alright, so this stuff you want to make sure you mix it up really well, obviously. It's just like anything else. If you don't mix it really well, then you're going to have weird spots or places that don't cure. And I've had that happen when I first started doing this. I wouldn't mix it up well enough and start cutting the micarta open to use it, and I'd have a big sticky spot where it didn't cure because there was no hardener in it. But just want to make sure it's really mixed in really well and go from there. So that should be pretty good. I usually like try to get down in there and scrape the bottom of the cup and scrape the sides and stuff, and just utilize as much of the liquid as I can. Alright. Alright, so we're going to start with black. So let me go ahead and get a little layer going. I always go bigger than what the fabric is, just to make sure. Oh, well, that's another thing. Quite often I'll actually use fabric for the linen, or for the micarta, but it's just this is what I have on hand and the colors that they're asking for, so that's what we're using. So yeah, see, it still kind of moves around, but as far as blowing away or anything like that, yeah, I'll just keep it on there. But that's pretty much it. Just paint it on here, let it coat it really well. I try to make sure that there's no dry spots in between layers. To me, that kind of seems like it would cause potential problems with curing in that spot, because in theory it should squeeze the resin in there when you clamp it, but that's as precautionary. If it's not dry, it's not going to hurt it. It will just squeeze out any excess that it doesn't need, basically. It also depends on how hard you clamp it too. I think I'm going to go 3 layers of each with this one. Give a little bit more bold colors, but not as bad. But yeah, it's going to squeeze out whatever it can't use, and it also depends on how tight you clamp it too. If you clamp it really tight, it's going to squeeze out a lot more. If you leave it a little loose, it won't squeeze out as much. But yeah, so that's the idea. So again, I'm going to shut the camera off and get the boarding stuff finished up, and I will be back when I'm getting ready to clamp this up. Alright. Alright guys, so I'm back. I got everything stacked. I do not know a layer count. I never count these things. I usually try to shoot for a 1/4 inch to maybe 3/8 on some thicker stuff after it's been pressed. So I try to not quite double it, but about 50 to 75% of the original thickness on top of what the original thickness is what I roughly go by. So I'm going closer to 1/4 inch on this, so I'm looking for about 3/8 to 1/2 inch. Again, it does also depend on how much you clamp it down and press it. You press it more, you're going to get a thinner piece. You clamp it less, you'll get a thicker piece. I try to do it moderately, but you know, it's not an exact science. So, simply just take the other side, and I try to push it down a little bit and see if it's going to squish and wiggle around, which it looks like it's doing pretty good. It will want to move on you while you're clamping it. So what I usually use first is I'll use these clamps because I can snap them down real quick. I try to do one on each side, obviously opposing sides. But one thing that I found that helps me is if I bring this out to the edge of the table and then drop it down and just clamp it just enough to put some pressure on it, and then I'll pick everything up and twist it around. Because once I get these two clamps on, it's not nearly as bad, but if you're not careful, it will twist and slide in one direction more than the other, and you want to try to keep even pressure applied as you're clamping it down. And then I'll just add whatever clamps I got laying around. Always remember, there's no such thing as too many clamps. I am horribly understocked on clamps. But until you get all the clamps on there that you're going to use, I always leave them kind of loose, just because I don't want to put too much pressure on one side and then it squeeze out into a different portion of the mold or anything, but just enough to keep it on there. Try to move this one over a little bit. And put this one over here. Now the two big clamps are going to do most of my clamping force, mostly just because they reach closer to the center. The rest ones are just more of keeping control. But yeah, just very slight force, and then I go through and crank them all as even as I can. Again, it's not an exact science, so it's a little difficult to manage like that. I feel like I'm heavy on the clamps on this side, so it needs to go over. Another thing to keep in mind, especially if you're using the fiberglass resin, it does rely on temperature. Right now it's January in northeast Georgia, so it's not freezing cold, but it's chilly. It's below the optimal temperature that they want you to use this stuff in, so keep that in mind, that will make it take longer to cure. This stuff is heat reactive, so the warmer it is, the quicker it flashes off. The cooler it is, the longer it takes. So it gives you a little more time too when you're doing it like me in the winter, because you're not fighting the heat. So just go through and cinch them all down. And one thing I like about using the fiberglass resin, I can actually come back out here in about an hour, hour and a half, and it should be at least cured enough that I can take it out of the mold. So most other resins, they ain't doing that. You're going to be waiting until the next day at least. Some of them 36, 48 hours or even more. So I go around trying to make sure that I've got even pressure, but I'm also trying to get to, I wouldn't say a certain pressure, but a spot where I feel like I've got enough pressure. And you can see the gap in here is roughly about 1/4 of an inch. So it looks like I got about where I want to be. So that's pretty much it for now. Just let it sit and cure, and I'll come back once it's cured up and ready to go, and we'll unmold this on camera. What's going on, YouTube? Kind of got really busy, and I didn't film the uncasting of the micarta, but this is a test piece that I cut off. Let me focus in on this a little bit, if I can. Okay, so you can kind of see the layers there. Focus. Yeah, you can kind of see the layers in there. Again, this was 3 pieces of each color for each layer. But yeah, this is basically what it looks like after you unmold it. Obviously I ran it through a bandsaw and trimmed it up, and then I always like to grind a piece and test it, and this is after all the way up to 2000 grit and buffing. So it's got a nice sheen to it. You can see that in the camera quite nice, actually. But yeah, looks more like a wood grain pattern when you start to contour in different ways. You can see the little curves towards the corners where I curved it. But yeah, that's the finished product, and I'll show you the finished handles on my Facebook page and Twitter and Instagram once the knife itself is done. Alright guys, thanks for watching, and hopefully the next video won't take so long. But yeah, alright, so guys, thanks for watching. Like and subscribe if you want to see more. Please comment if you tell me I'm doing a crappy job, or any pointers of what you'd like to see, or anything that I can do to help. Just let me know. Alright guys, see you later.